Thank you for joining us today. Before we start, I'd like to give a couple housekeeping items. First, the audience is attending this presentation in listen-only mode. If you have any questions for the speakers, please drop them into the Q&A component of the Zoom dashboard. Matthew, we'll turn things over to you now.
Thank you. I am Mathew Kerbis, an attorney with Condon & Cook in Chicago, and I'm the Young Lawyer Liaison to the ABA section of Legal Education and Admissions to the Bar. On behalf of the ABA Young Lawyers and Law Student Divisions, I am happy to welcome all of you to this important discussion about the state of legal education and the future of legal education from pre-law to practice. Today's town hall grew out of conversations with LSAC leading up to the ABA winter meetings last month. We all agreed there are so many issues and opportunities surrounding every aspect of legal education that it would be important to bring together key leaders to share their views and engage in an open dialogue with law students, recent law graduates, and young lawyers who are embarking on their legal careers. Given the importance of these issues and the many opportunities for collaboration and positive change, particularly as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, we hope that today's session is just the first of several in the months ahead. Today, we have a great panel of leaders who will be sharing some initial thoughts and then addressing your questions. We'll be using the Q&A function to take your questions, and we'll be aggregating them and presenting the key themes and questions to the panel. We may not get to all of your questions, but we will do our best. Now to introduce our panelists. Kelly Testy is the president and CEO of the Law School Admission Council, where she has been an outspoken advocate for diversity, equity, and access. Prior to joining LSAC in 2017, she served as Dean of the University of Washington Law School and Dean of the Seattle University School of Law. Dean Testy is known for creating one of the first ever courses on the issues of law and sexuality in the 1990s and still teaches classes on law and leadership. Bill Adams is the Managing Director of Accreditation and Legal Education for the ABA's section of Legal Education and Admissions to the Bar. Before taking on the role of Managing Director, Bill served as Deputy Managing Director for 5.5 years. Prior to his work at the ABA, Bill was an experienced legal education administrator, having served as a dean, associate dean, and professor of law for 25 years. His other accolades and positions of service to legal education are too numerous to mention here. Camille De Journ is the interim chief diversity officer and deputy for legal education at LSAC. Prior to joining LSAC, Camille was the associate deputy managing director of the ABA section of legal education and admissions to the bar. Prior to her work at the ABA, she oversaw admission and student affairs at Columbia University, Hofstra University, and the University of Iowa Schools of Law. Camille will be moderating our Q&A. Fe Lopez-Gateky is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at LSAC. She previously served as Executive Director of the Seattle Community Police Commission, where she represented minoritized communities in police reform efforts under federal consent decree, and as Director of Alumni Relations at Seattle University School of Law. She has received several awards for leadership and excellence in diversity. Evan Didier is the Director of Enrollment Management at LSAC, where he provides consulting services that help member law schools reach data-driven conclusions. Previously, he served as Associate Director of Admissions and Enrollment Analytics at Boston College Law School. At the end of the presentation, I will be joining the panel for Q&A along with Anders Miller, who is a current law student at the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, and he represents law students on the ABA Law Student Division Council as their legal education director. In that role, he also serves as the voting law student member on the ABA section of legal education and admissions to the Bar Council. Prior to law school, he taught English to high school students in Columbus, Ohio. It's worth noting that all of our panelists have a JD, so everyone you'll be hearing from today or we'll soon have a JD. And so they all have had their own journey through the legal education system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And it's such a pleasure for me to be with you all today. So I want to tell you how glad I am to be here and to have a chance to talk about legal education, which is, of course, a great passion of mine and has been my whole career. I thought I might start with a little bit about LSAC and a little bit about the journey from pre-law into law school and kind of where we are in that important step in becoming a JD, as Matthew notes. So let me start by saying that a lot of people don't know that LSAC has been around a long time. We were actually formed back in 1945. And the reason we came into existence and the reason the LSAT was created was because at that time, law school admissions were done only on the basis of, what school did you go to? What was your GPA? Who did you know? Who was your dad? Who were your recommenders? And it was really keeping out women, people of color, religious minorities. And so our whole reason for coming into existence was to help to really open up legal education and to make sure that it wasn't about privilege, but about potential in terms of getting into law school and succeeding. And so that's why the LSAT is designed to assess the three most fundamental skills that help someone succeed in law school and also in practice. And that's skills of reading comprehension, analysis in a critical analysis way, and also the writing skill. And that's the on-ramp skills that really help in legal education. And so we want to make sure that those are always the skills that we look at. We don't want those to be too broad at entry because we know that law school adds a lot. And so we want to only look at those most fundamental skills. And so we are very proud that because of what the LSAT does, it opens up the potential for many people to attend law school. And at the same time, LSAC is far more than just the LSAT. We really function as a hub for all law schools around the country because we provide the software that they use in admissions. And because of our origination stories being about diversity, equity, inclusion, we are a vocal and vigorous advocate for diversity in the legal profession and have many programs, and my colleagues will talk about those, that tries to advance equity in the legal profession. I think Bill Adams from the ABA and I would be the first people to say that while we have, as a system of legal education, made progress on diversity and equity, there's still much more to go, and we're all trying to work really hard at that. Just to share a few statistics, women now make up 37% of the legal profession. That's up from around 30% in 2010. But with being half of the population, that's still a long way to go. And when you look at the levels of partners in law firms, of course, there's still great underrepresentation. People of color in the legal profession, BIPOC communities, certainly there's been progress because legal education right now is admitting most every racial subgroup at or above rates of college graduation. But we still see that because the pipeline of college graduates and even before that high school graduates is restricted because of inequality, the legal profession itself is still not as diverse as society. So for instance, Black lawyers comprise just 5% of the profession compared to 13% of the overall population. If we look at Latinx communities, 18% of the population, but only 5% of the profession. Asian Americans, 6% of the population, but only 2% of the profession. And of course, indigenous populations have similar underrepresentation as well. So we need to all keep working really hard to advance equity. And what it's going to take to do that is to understand and really appreciate what can help and what can hurt. And so one example that I'm very close to now, of course, is that some people believe that you could accelerate diversity if you didn't have a test like the LSAT or the SAT or ACT. The undergraduate context is very different than the graduate context, and I'm going to set that aside. But all research that is credible shows that if you eliminate a standardized test, you're going to go backwards in diversity. And that's because of the very reason I shared with you at the outset, for the reason of our formation. Without that, you have only factors to use that are subject to much more bias, much more interpretation, much more privilege. And so we feel very strongly that we have to hone to what the research shows, that we need to use the LSAT as an includer, as one factor in a holistic process. All the research shows that that is what most will promote equity. Now, I know this is a bit of a radical thing for the head of LSAC to say, but I am very aware that law schools actually over-rely on the LSAT. And that's something that we are working hard to help advance and educate people about. while it is the single best factor to predict law school success, it still should be one factor in a holistic process. And so we publish clear guidelines on that usage, and the ABA actually has standards that require schools to use the test in according to our standards. And so there are the mechanisms there where we, I hope, can continue to make progress there. Properly used, it's the best way to promote equity, but we need to make sure it is properly used. I want to note too that this conversation is a stark reminder that what we're really talking about here is that access to learning in our world is unequal. And we know that, and we have to face that. You know, getting rid of any measurement of that inequality is not going to cure the inequality. We have to go to the source and work for educational equality along every piece of the pipeline. And I'm proud that the LSAC, together with the ABA, our member law schools, and AALS, we all are devoted to that goal and must keep working to enhance that journey. One of the things that we've done that I think has helped a great deal is that we have put forth 2 free LSAT preparation platforms. One is through the Khan Academy, and that's a wonderful platform that believes that everyone deserves an education. And I love that platform. And the usage right now, that free LSAT prep that we have through Khan, 70,000 users a month. And the efficacy, how much people can improve their skills through that is really encouraging. And there's no shortcuts. We have to build skills so that then there's success in law school, then there's success at licensure, and then there's success on into practice. And it's really a focus on that holistic journey that we really all must retain. I also want to mention that we have a second tool called Law Hub that's also providing free LSAT preparation. And so these tools really help even the playing field so that there's high quality access for free and it works. And it's really, you know, a very, very good and strong tool. I want to also note that in addition to the free preparation, my colleague Fe Lopez will talk about some of the other initiatives we have around diversity. We've recently named a new Chief Diversity Officer, and we're just so excited about that, and many of the programs that we're putting together with member schools to help build that pipeline and assure the success from pre-law through practice. And that, I think, is what we all need to really focus upon, is that whole holistic journey. A second thing that I want to mention today that we've done is that obviously the pandemic has hit all of us very hard. And I want to say thank you to all of you, because I know it's impacted your practices, your schooling, and your licensure in so many ways. We were able to make a very quick rotation and deliver the LSAT remotely, excuse me, in very predictable ways that our candidates have really enjoyed doing from the comfort of their home and not having the anxiety of having to travel. We've also, though, coupled that with providing free loaner devices and helping get access to quiet spaces with good internet. So again, the effects of the pandemic are uneven, and this helps bring that more to an equality space. We're committed to continuing to do that. Now, as I close, I want to say I look forward to our questions, but I want to leave you both with a hopeful note and a bit of a sobering one. The hopeful one is that this admission cycle is really awesome. Applications are up overall, and every racial group is up as well. And so it's very encouraging to see that in the midst of a pandemic where law is so important, we're seeing still a very robust demand for legal ed, and we've been able to help candidates continue their enrollment journeys. But the sobering part of this is that as I look back at the college pipeline, the pandemic has had deep effects in communities of color. And, I'm a first generation college grad. It's also had deep effects in terms of economic equality. So we are going to have to work even harder to make sure that that pipeline into legal education stays strong. And I know that we're certainly committed to that and engaging in a number of initiatives now so that we can start to work on that together. So we have some reason for hope. We also have a lot of work to do. And I want to now hand off to my colleague at the ABA, Bill Adams, the managing director there. And in doing that, just thank Bill as he's come into this new role at a very challenging time, and thank him for all he's doing to advance quality, access, and equity in legal education as we are. Bill, it's all to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thanks to the Law Student Division, Young Lawyers Division for asking me to be on this panel today. I just want to very quickly explain the ABA's role in legal education because it's frequently misunderstood, and it's easy for me to understand why, because we say that law schools are ABA approved, and people sometimes will complain to the president of the ABA or the executive director of the ABA saying that something needs to be done with a law school or legal education, not understanding that the accrediting body is actually separate from, we have a separate and independent status from the trade association ABA. So the governance of legal education is not handled at all by the president of the ABA or its executive director. It is from a volunteer council, a council of the section of legal education and admissions to the bar. The council consists, and I'm the managing director. I'm not on that council. My office supports the governing body. The governing body, like I said, is the council of the section. It consists of 21 members, which include no more than 10 people from law schools. So the law school representatives are usually law school professors or law school deans. The other 11 members are judges, lawyers, and 3 members have to be members of the public. In addition, the Law Student Division has a voting member on the council, and the Young Lawyers Division has a liaison to the council. Prior to the Great Recession, 7 or 8 years ago, the number of law schools gradually increased on an ongoing basis. There would be 1 to 4 new law schools added every year. But when the Great Recession occurred and law school applications fell dramatically, that stopped. And so for the first time, at least in since the beginning of ABA accrediting law schools, the growth stopped, and we actually had an unprecedented number of schools close. We had approximately half a dozen schools close over the last 5 or 6 years. So we are not seeing the kind of growth in the number of law schools, and I don't anticipate that we'll see any new law schools unless law school applications start going up dramatically on a sustained basis. Currently, we have 197 ABA approved law schools, and that doesn't count one law school, which is teaching out the students in its ABA program. The council's emphasis prior to the pandemic in the last few years was really looking at the bar passage performance of law schools, because at some law schools, bar passage had dropped dramatically, below 50% for some of the law schools. And so that was really the focus of the council in trying to talk to schools about why their outcomes with their graduates was disappointing, and trying to direct them in ways to do better. We've sanctioned a number of law schools over this, and I'm glad to see that we have seen improvement and that schools have been having better performance from the graduates. We also, as an accreditor, provide more consumer information than I think almost any other accreditor. You may very well be aware that every law school is required on its website to have a link to what's called ABA required disclosures, where we require schools to give extensive data on applications, enrollment, what their law school administration and number of faculty look like. We also have a separate report on employment statistics that require schools to report on what kind of jobs their graduates have been getting 10 months after they graduate. I do want to say now that you should look at this year's statistics with some caution because of the delay in bar exam administration this year. A lot of people got their bar exam results later than usual. So 10 months out, the employment statistics will probably not look as good as they would normally in a non-pandemic year. And you should look at this year's statistics with that in mind. We give you 3-year statistics, and I think you should look at all 3 to get a sense of how that school is doing. We also require schools to provide a report on the bar exam outcomes that their graduates have, which we also hope is helpful to you. During the past year, trying to help schools stay open during the pandemic has been the focus of my office and also the council. We have always had limits on the amount of distance education that law schools can provide. The council had expanded those a little prior to the pandemic, but still the restriction was no more than 10 credits in the first year could be offered via distance education, and no more than 1/3 of the credits required for graduation could be offered through distance education. Obviously, the pandemic required schools to exceed that. So the council has been permitting schools to go fully online if needed, or to engage in hybrid education to the extent that's needed. We will continue to look at this moving forward after the pandemic is over to see if we want to continue to lift those restrictions. We'll look at the feedback we get from the experience that students have had and law schools have had in providing this amount of distance education. The council also this year has a priority goal of looking at its standards and how they impact diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we'll be looking to see if we need to strengthen our diversity standards or if other standards are hindering diversity in law schools. And so that's a major project and goal of the council as it looks at going through this year. I know you have lots of questions, and so rather than continue to talk about what the council is thinking of doing, I want to turn it over to some of our other panelists so that they can speak and that we can answer your questions. And so following me will be Fe Lopez-Gatke, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Law School Admissions Council, and I look forward to hearing her comments. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for having us here today. Again, my name is Fe Lopez-Gatke, Director of DEI. I joined LSAC back in the summer of 2019. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. So a little bit about me. My parents were farm workers and we moved around a lot. I was in 13 different schools by the time I was in 6th grade and mostly lived in rural areas all over Washington and Texas. So I went to law school to work on farm worker rights because there was just so many issues that came up in those spaces that we felt so powerless and no perspective. And so I really wanted to impact and change and provide some power to my own community. And then I came out of law school working on DEI issues in legal higher education and police reform policy. So when I was in the thick of working on police reform issues in Seattle under federal consent decree, Kelly recruited me for this position. And I thought, why would I want to work at the LSAC? They only do the Lsat. And side note, Kelly was my 1L contracts professor back in 2003 and has been a mentor and sponsor to me ever since. And so I did talk to her. We sat down and had a really important, excellent conversations. And I was convinced that I could work at LSAC and impact the pipeline of the legal profession. Often I have been the only woman of color in these powerful political spaces, and it's incredibly challenging and incredibly lonely to feel the weight of advocacy and perspective alone. Also, our communities are not monoliths. We need representation at every level. So here I am, and we are doing that work. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that work and how important partnerships with our allies, including the ABA, are so important in thinking about and changing the culture of legal education and the legal profession itself. As Kelly said, while LSAC is best known for the LSAT, we actually provide a wide range of programs. And so I'm going to go into some of those pipeline programs and talk to you about how we're focusing our efforts in those spaces. So through small grants, we host and support over 100 DEI pipeline events every year, mostly through law schools. We fund and manage the annual PLUS program, which is targeted at first and second year undergraduates considering a career in law. The PLUS program has served more than 5,000 minoritized students over the life of the program. And I'm going to put some links in the chat after I'm done with this so that you all can see all the various things, most of the things that I'm talking about, and can get more information. We have just also issued a report that I'll post in the chat called The Need for Intentionality, Insights from Research and the LSAC Plus program. The purpose of this report is to be informative regarding LSAC's pipeline work and to contribute to the ongoing conversation about effective and impactful DEI pipeline program in legal education. The report first provides a brief overview of relevant research about diversity in law school and student learning to inform law school pipeline programming. Second, the report spotlights the PLUS program and shares what we have learned about the importance of intentionality and how we will use research, student feedback, and data in pipeline program development in order to bring about a more meaningful and transformative impact on the lives of prospective law school candidates. Addressing inequity and promoting access requires an intentional shift in the focus of pipeline work from addressing the question of why is there a lack of diversity in law school to addressing the question of how are we promoting and cultivating law school aspirations among minoritized students in the pipeline. And then finally, based on what we've learned, the report provides a list of guiding frameworks, questions, tips, and resources to think about how to plan and drive intentionality in pipeline programming. We want to share our knowledge with other pipeline programs so we can enhance opportunities for minoritized students. Oftentimes, pipeline programs are run by one person who have a lot of other things to do. And so we want to make sure we're building that community and sharing with the community. In addition, we also just finished up the Equality Conference. It wrapped up. It was called the Celebrate the Person Within, which occurred last week on March 3rd and 4th. The last one, it was in 2018. The purpose of the LSAC Equality Conference is to build, foster, and support an inclusive law school environment for LGBTQIA+ students with a focus on intersectionality. And, you know, it's not like I'm a woman on Monday, Latinx on Tuesday, and a lawyer on Wednesday. We are all of these things, and our communities, and when we discuss these issues, must really think about the intersectionality and the nuances of that approach. This year's all-digital conference offered law school administrators, staff, and faculty a unique opportunity to learn about best practices for welcoming and supporting LGBTQIA+ students, engage in critical discussions about meaningful changes in admission practices that reflect a commitment to the DEI, and look beyond limited social construct of identity. We also recently published the Justice Impact Law School Survey that I'll also include in the link in the chat. In collaboration with the National Justice Impact Bar Association, we administered the Justice Impact Law School Survey in September of 2020 as a first step in understanding how law schools across the US are recruiting, admitting, and supporting justice impacted students. And we know, and maybe it's I know, but we know that justice impacted students are often Black and Brown students, right? Black and Brown communities. And so that is an incredible impact to the pipeline when we're thinking about diversifying the legal profession. So we want to help schools reflect on how recruitment and admissions policies and practices affect justice impacted candidates. Addressing inequity requires evaluating how our current practices act as mechanisms of exclusion. And the information from this survey will provide the knowledge base need to begin the process of that change. And so we actually just submitted that report, and I'll put it in the chat. So something we have upcoming is the LGBTQ+ Guide to Law School. LSAC will be administering a new comprehensive LGBTQ plus law school survey to all U.S. member law schools later this month. The purpose of this survey is to collect information on diversity and how law schools support LGBTQ plus, gender nonconforming, and or non-binary students. The survey currently under development, again, includes questions about policies, recruitment, admissions, curriculum, the student experience, and other information related to supporting candidates. The information will be published on our website as the LGBTQ plus guide to law school to help candidates navigate the law school application process and find the law school that's right fit for them. And while designed largely to support candidates through their law school enrollment journeys, the guide will also provide information essential to schools, striving to ensure a welcoming and inclusive environment for all students, to make trends, policies, and practices in legal education accessible for law schools and thinking about these particular issues. We also have some work related to a technical advisory group on DEI categories. Later on, if you have questions about that, that's a really important project we're working on, that we're working with consultants and researchers who are diverse and really taking on categories. We also, as Kelly mentioned, we have a new Chief Diversity Officer, Angela Winfield. I'll include a link more about her. She'll be starting with us in May, and we're really excited about that. I know that there have been some questions, some pre-questions that related to how do we address the culture of legal education and how do we want to highlight that? Like, how do we do that? And I wanted to just kind of flag, and I'll put it into the chat, that there is the AALS Law Dean's Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project, a project that is spearheaded by women of color deans that provide a framework for how law schools to follow to address DEI and racism with legal higher education. I'll put that link in the chat as well. So there is so many more things. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I just want to share everything because there's just so much that's going on. But I'm happy to answer more questions about that. I'll put a lot of information in the chat. And at this time, I'd like to introduce my fantastic colleague, Evan Didier, who is the LSAC Director of Enrollment Management. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Faye. I'm not sure I can follow up on that, but I also want to thank the American Bar Association for hosting today's webinar on the state of legal education. I really appreciate the opportunity to share more. So by way of background, I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, suburbia, and I'm biracial. So my two sides of the family come from very different cultures. I'm to this day the only attorney in my family. And at the time I went to law school, this was in 2009, California had just passed Proposition 8 the year before in November 2008. And as a member of the LGBTQ community, I'd entered UVA when it was less than 1% of the class was openly identifying as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And so just reflecting on the, roughly 10, 11 years since then, I think a lot has changed. Same-sex marriage is legal in the United States. The last time I talked to Cordell Falk, who is the former assistant dean of admissions at UVA Law School, it was really great to hear that those percentages are much closer to double digits now than they were in the days that I was attending. And my interest in law school admissions really stems back to the application process that I went through to go to law school. I took the Lsat. College game day was in town, as it turns out, that day. So it was a wild campus atmosphere. And I didn't necessarily, have a visceral reaction to the Lsat, but I just did view it as something that is just something you have to take as part of going to law school and didn't think too much beyond that. But my interest grew in that area, and my interest in how law schools use Lsat scores and GPAs grew too. So I actually created and ran a website at the time where you could input your Lsat score and your undergraduate GPA, and it give you your chances of being admitted to any of the ABA-approved law schools in the United States. So I'm happy to report that that website helped cover living expenses, most of them during law school at the time. Only wish it could also been able to cover tuition too. I sold that off when I started working in law school admissions at Boston College Law School, where I was the assistant and then associate director of admissions there. And I think, one of the things I really enjoyed about my experience in admissions and in my current work working with the member law schools here at LSAC is that admissions is both an art and a science. I mean, I certainly won't lie and say that LSAT scores and undergraduate GPAs don't matter in the admissions process. They definitely do. They're an important component, but they're also not the be all and end all of the admissions process, and they definitely shouldn't be. either. If it was just all numbers driven, you could set up a computer program to run through all the applications. It could spit out decisions, and there'd be no need for admissions offices at law schools. But I think one of the important factors that admissions offices do as part of their work, and admissions committees, is reviewing applicants holistically, taking a look at the entire application of that applicant. So not just their LSAT, not just their GPA, but their work experience, their recommendations, their personal statement, their interest in law, and combining that all together to render a decision about admitting the student to the law school, both taking into account, will this student be academically successful, but also will they be a good member of the law school community at their particular law school. And, in that area, I think the pandemic has definitely presented some challenges on educating and providing opportunities to applicants. I'm, very happy here at LSAC. We've been able to offer the LSAT Flex to students, and to build off what both Faye and Kelly were saying, we've also done some other things at LSAC to make things more accessible to applicants as well. That includes moving our in-person law school forums to a virtual environment. So back in the pre-pandemic days, which feels so long ago now, there'd be about 10 cities in the US, and then also in Toronto, where we'd have a big hotel ballroom. A lot of the law schools would attend. You as an applicant would register and be able to show up and talk to admissions officers at any of those schools. And, it was a great way to learn more about law schools, learn more about financial aid in law school. And, as an undergraduate student, if you're still an undergrad, maybe some of the things you could do to prepare for that course of action. These days, we offered 4 fairs back this fall, and we actually are very pleased that we had over 16,000 applicants and potential applicants attend those forums this past fall. That's almost 125% more than was all of our in-person forums combined in the past. So I think going forward will definitely be something that we will continue to offer, particularly because with geographic distribution with the in-person forums, it wasn't always possible to hit every state or every city in the United States as part of that. And we've also launched a relatively new team here at LSAC called Lsic Ambassadors, which work with both law schools and with pre-law advisors to provide educational opportunities about legal education and the application process to law schools as well. And so, they can either reach out to law schools, they can help set up a panel for the law school, host it, provide panelists, and then similarly for pre-law advisors or for pre-law groups. At undergraduate institutions, there's also the opportunity for us to host sessions for you and, provide support to your pre-law advisor if there is one at the institution. And if there's not, still, provide some overall guidance and support, whether that's as broad as the application process generally, or more narrowly, something like how would you craft a personal statement. And so I want to be cognizant of the time, and also that I think we have a few questions that have come in since then. So I want to take this opportunity to pass off to Camille De Journ, who is our Deputy for Legal and Global Higher Education here at the Law School Admission Council.
Evan, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you today. These are important topics in legal education, and we have great contributors here to try to answer some of the questions. I want to start with one question that we had coming into this, and that is, how has the pandemic affected operations and legal education in general? I think Kelly and Bill may have touched on this in their opening remarks. So I'd like to include right now, and then we could come back to Kelly and Bill if they are so inclined. I'd like to ask Matt Kerbis and Anders Miller for what the impact has been among their membership within the Young Lawyers and the Law Student Division. And are you anticipating resolutions, for example, to address any of these issues?
Anders actually being in law school right now, I think maybe you want to field this answer first, and then I'm happy to give the young lawyer perspective.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. And I mean, COVID's really impacted every part of the legal experience, from going into classroom. Excuse me, sorry about that. From going into classrooms to being able to, just see and network people in the profession. So the range of issues extend to all of the same issues that everybody else is facing, which is like upending our finances. There are a lot of people who have lost opportunities for jobs through the summer, or those summer opportunities have been truncated in some way. And Regarding the question about resolutions, we definitely have some resolutions going on, and a lot of them are focused on the on the bar exam process, on the making sure that people have access to accommodations and things of that sort, where it is, COVID has exposed a whole bunch of issues that were already here, but it's exposed them even more. So we have a lot of issues that we could be taking up, but with that, we are always open to hearing more about student experiences and hearing more about what we can be doing to support students in this time. So that's just kind of a quick, brief overview. I'll throw it over to Matt and see what he has to say.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot of what Anders is saying, and with regard to the profession, especially for young lawyers, which those of you watching this, hopefully one day you make it to be a young lawyer. There's a lot of opportunity right now because of COVID and because of the pandemic, and there's been it's affected the profession unevenly, just like with the Great Recession. There are some areas of law that have been hit harder with this, and then there are others who have it's been a boon to them. For the billable hour in litigation, there's been a significant decrease with not having to travel and being able to bill for travel or going to court, and the whole system being shaken up with a lot of it moving virtually. And so there's a lot of opportunity with tying the law school process through to practice, which is, if law school is being taught online right now, but a lot of these skills that the law students are gaining may be still useful when they practice law, where now you could practice more in a virtual setting than you've ever been able to do before, which means that we could potentially bring more access to justice to people who couldn't actually go physically meet with a lawyer before. So I think there's actually a lot of good opportunity that can come out of the pandemic with regard to practice of law.
Thanks, that's very helpful. One question that came up in the Q&A was the question about the impact of US News and World Report, and specifically the over-reliance on the LSAT. Kelly, did you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, Camille, I'd be glad to. And I did mention in my remarks that, we have strong guidance that the LSAT should be one factor in a holistic admission process, and that we've talked with member schools about over-reliance on the LSAT. It's something that is driven by US News. I started being a dean in 2003, and the influence of US News and legal education has become more and more strong through those decades. And it's unfortunate for a number of reasons. But I want to make sure everyone realizes that, we all have a hand in this. Students follow it, alumni follow it, universities. And so that puts pressure on deans to then manage for that. So I think we all need to join together in understanding that really what matters is a good fit in law school. Where you fit and where you thrive, that's going to make you have the ability to make the most impact in your communities. And so I'm hoping that kind of, religiosity around US News can be something we all start to address together. I do hope, and when we are active advocates for this, that other factors can be added into those US News rankings, such as especially about factors around diversity, equity, inclusion. And anytime you have more factors, it can mute the influence of any one factor. And so that's something that I hope that I understand some conversations are proceeding on, and hope that might be something to help. I also want to make clear that even with the US News tyranny, it measures a median. Every school has many LSATs above and below that. And so you should really not get too focused on that, using more of a holistic look yourself at the law schools. And that's something also that we'll continue to try and help educate our community about, which is how to make sure that you're not, that you're actually using the room that you have to assure a diverse and awesome entering class.
Thanks, Kelly. There were a couple of questions around the quality of teaching in legal education, the interdisciplinary nature of legal education. Bill, do you want to start on those with respect to how the standards address teaching and perhaps clinics and sort of interdisciplinary courses. And then Kelly perhaps can weigh in after that.
So our standards do require that law schools assess the quality of their teaching. And when site teams visit the schools, they sit in on classes and make recommendations to the school about the teaching. Law schools have never required that law school faculty have training in pedagogy. So that is historically not been required. For whatever reason, the perception has been that having people who are trained in the law is more important. Whether that should continue to be the case is something that I think law schools have to examine on their own as to what they expect of their faculty. I mean, as one of the questionnaires mentioned, at many law schools, the scholarship of a professor is deemed more important than teaching, which is something that a law school may make that determination. We do expect schools to have competent and qualified faculty. And like I say, when we do site visits on schools, we do provide feedback to them about what we've observed and what things they might do. I mean, more schools are now doing training to their faculty on teaching, and I'm glad to see that. And we're seeing more scholarship on how to do better teaching. And I hope, and the council is also now requiring law schools to do more assessment of what they're accomplishing in their schools. And I hope through our assessment standards, we also can start requiring schools to be more accountable for the quality of teaching that's going on in their schools.
Thanks, Kelly.
Bill, I think your point is so well taken that the trajectory of improvement on this front is good. In my time in legal education, I've seen more and more emphasis upon teaching. That said, we do know that there's a range in every school. And I would just speak to the students and as a dean and say, sometimes as dean, I'm in my office waiting for you to come complain to me. I want you to tell me what you think. I want to know so that can help empower me to take action. As you all know, the law school environment is an interesting one, as in all of higher ed, because there's a lot of deference to tenured faculty, and that gives administrators fewer tools in terms of moving when there might be something that needs addressed. But I can tell you now that I work with all law schools around the country that the quality of teaching overall is strong and getting stronger. And when you look at legal education in the US compared to around the world, you will see that we are really the pinnacle of the quality of teaching in the legal education classrooms. And so there is room for improvement. There always is. As we all know, in any group of people, there will be some who will outperform and some who will underperform. But know that most everyone wants there to be a good teaching. And if you're experiencing something that's not, use your voice on your student evals with your student deans and your dean to let them know what your needs are and what your perceptions are.
Great, thanks. I'd like to turn us now perhaps to the educational preparation for students who are thinking about law school. A number of us on the call today are first-gen graduates of law schools, for example. And we know, sadly, that one impact of the pandemic has been the disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities, and a higher toll on those who are actually in the educational pipeline. And one thing we're really paying attention to, I think, in legal education is that while Brown v. Board of Ed certainly is the law, and it certainly has made some impact on racial segregation in public education, on the other hand, it hasn't solved every problem. And there have been state roadblocks that have contributed to more difficulties and sort of a new kind of segregation in public education. And so with that, I guess I'd like to turn us to the pipeline and how it is that we ensure that we're truly building a robust pipeline and reaching all students who might have a passion for changing the world through law. And I think to start us out, we have about 10 minutes remaining. Let's hear from Faye and then Evan and perhaps Matt.
You know, that's the question of the ages, you know, because it's pervasive and it really it took hundreds of years to get here to build those systems, and it's not going to change overnight. So it's going to take a long-term investment, and an understanding of the nuances. For instance, you know, desegregating schools was considered to be a highlight of the civil rights movement. However, there was unintended consequences to that, because what it actually also did was decimated a whole profession for the Black community. There were teachers. So when they desegregated the schools, they said, oh, only kids can go to white schools. Then they didn't say, oh, kids can also, black teachers can teach white students. And so it really decimated a whole profession, right? And so that's why representation is important to developing the rules, the laws, the policies, to understand that how the unintended consequences of race neutral or these innovative, solutions are actually embedded into the communities that they're actually impacting. So we have to think about, how do we work with communities to understand how we can build better pipelines? Back in November, New York, the New York Bar Association did a whole report about New York State, about Black and Brown students in the pipeline to the legal profession. And they actually surveyed Black and Brown undergraduate students. And you know what they found? 85% of Black and Brown students had no idea that there were pipeline programs that existed, or that what a pipeline program was. It is a term of art. So even how we talk about these things and how we're accessing communities is so important to understanding all of the various needs. So I would say, one of the biggest things that we're thinking about and that we want to is, number one, we need to convene. We need to stop, working in these silos across the nation, because it's an often lonely process. Two, we need to start working within the communities, asking the students, asking the communities that are most impacted about what are their needs, to ensuring that we can actually access them and build that pipeline together, right? So those are just a few things that we are working on. And thinking about how do we build this pipeline, but it is a long-term investment that takes a nuanced approach, and thinking about what are our metrics of success, and how are we really going to impact our legal profession.
Thanks, Matt.
It's a hard question to answer. I think to the extent to some of the work that I'm doing and that issues that I'm looking at, I think, lowering barriers to entry to law school, and how do you do that the right way? The ABA Young Lawyers Division just adopted a resolution on supporting accreditation of an all online law school curriculum. So whether that's existing law schools that could teach online entirely, or allowing new competitors into the market, maybe, economics, I think, tells us that should drive down the cost of law school, and open up and make it more affordable. So then making law school more affordable should allow for more access to minorities, people of color, to go to law school. However, we can't rush to that. It has to be done right. Like Beth said, there could be sometimes consequences that you don't anticipate. So I know that Bill said in his opening remarks that the section is looking very closely at what's going on with online law schools right now. So I know that's being looked into, but I think that at least from my perspective, I will be supporting those sorts of efforts with the hopes that that means more diverse law students in the future.
Great, thanks, Matt. And Evan, I had sort of teed you up and then moved on, so my apologies.
I would just add, echoing both Matt and Faye, is that it's a very long pipeline, and there's the LSAT as a point in the process, but to get there are a lot of things that have to happen or should happen before you are in a position to be a viable law school applicant. You have a bachelor's degree or about to receive a bachelor's degree, and that means that at some point you had to graduate from high school somewhere too. And those are all steps along the way that once you get to law school and you look at your peers, you're like, oh, that's just a common path, but it really isn't for many people, particularly particularly lower socioeconomic Black and Brown communities and some of the other minoritized communities. And I think as an admissions community and as a legal education community, we have to, work on building things out where there's not going to be short-term results that are going to be that measurable. We can't say, 1 year from now, look at these great results from this program, because it really starts when people are much younger. And, we do great things at LSAC. We have Law Hub for LSAT prep. Faye actually helps run a diversity pipeline program during the summers for undergraduate students, but those still are all based on reaching certain milestones that occurred years before any of this would ever happen. So I would just say that's something we want to think about, and also something as we look forward to after people graduate, not just the number of Black and Brown and minoritized lawyers there are in the community, but how they're distributed. Because if you look at, say, big law distribution, you could pick partners in particular, but really across the board, that looks very different than, say, people working in legal aid communities, which looks very different than people working general counsel's offices. And, I think a world that we'd want to work towards is where it's a more equal and equitable distribution across all those areas. And for the people who want to do legal aid, that's great. And I definitely think we need them, but it's also something that's a much broader problem in terms of where I think legal resources get allocated in the end in terms of where people work. And then also, the allocation of those lawyers as well.
Thanks, Evan. I see that Bernetta Hayes from Clio is with us, and certainly Clio has done a remarkable job of expanding the pipeline and really doing quite a lot over the past 25 years for improving the participation of underrepresented folks in the legal profession. Anders, we have about 4 minutes left, but I just wanted to give you a minute to weigh in on this, because it looks like the Law Student Division does have a whole range of different proposals for anti-racism in law schools, tuition freeze, ending Black hair discrimination, a number of things, but just wondering if in a minute or two you could sum up some thoughts about the pipeline from the Law Student Division.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to echo what everybody else has said. I mean, I think that we always need to improve in that area, because we are already kind of working behind the curve here. So I was a high school English teacher in a Title I school. So I think about my students and how I had a lot of students who I know could be successful in law school if they had resources and if they had experiences that mirrored things that I had growing up. And that in itself kind of biases this whole system. So in order for us to make any sort of headway, we need to really, I think, start thinking systemically. And that's what the Law Student Division really wants us to focus on, is systemically, what are the issues that are preventing people from getting into the legal profession and becoming successful. And I mean, I think about our resolution from this past year. I mean, people couldn't bring menstrual products into the bar exam. And I mean, when you think about how long those exams are and how much those, products are needed, frankly, it's pretty bewildering to a lot of law students why it's been this long. But that bewilderment, we just kind of transformed into energy and into action to help push our profession forward, because at the end of the day, the institution is what we make it. And as law students, we want to be involved in that process from the beginning of our interest in law school, like the pre-law programs, or I taught in a program for high school students from communities that are underserved in Columbus when I was coming into law school. So programs like that, all the way up until we are past the Young Lawyers Division and actually in leadership roles. We want to have that continuum of leadership. So that's really the main focus here, and we would really like to have that continue and to keep and deepen those efforts.
Thank you so much, Anders. So we're just about out of time. We have about 2 minutes left. So closing remarks from Matt first, then Bill, then Kelly. Unlimited if we can.
Just 20 seconds. Just for those of you watching this who are considering law school, who are in law school. Well, first of all, I think we need more lawyers, and I think it's a great profession. And I encourage that if you're considering law school, you go to law school. And to those who are considering and those who are in law school, if you're not a member of the American Bar Association, it's free for law students. Join for all the things that law school doesn't do for you. I think getting involved in the ABA can help fill those gaps. And then I hope that you derive great benefit from that and stay involved when you become a young lawyer.
Great, thanks. Bill?
So I just want to encourage all of you, you have a law student division representative to the council. And once you become lawyers, you will have a young lawyer division liaison. As boards go, I mean, our council is mostly distinguished professionals who are decades removed from law school. So it's really critically important that you talk to your law student division representative and your young lawyers division representative to let the council know what law students are experiencing and what young lawyers need in getting their legal education. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Kelly, we'll give you the last word here.
Thank you. I would just say that we need lawyers now like never before. So let's all work together. I think we do share goals. And as the Black feminist Bell Hooks said, you know, education is sacred. It changes everything. What brought me to LSAC, what gets me up every morning is working for access and equity in law. So I just thank everyone who's pushing this boulder up the hill together. Let's stay at it. We need it. Thank you very much.
So I'm reminded in closing about an important Maasai quote, one of my favorites. If you want to go quickly, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So we do have a long way to go in legal education, the profession, but we can get there if we do it together. So thanks, everyone. Thanks to the young lawyers and thanks to the Law Student Division and to the big ABA. Have a good day.